Hey gamers, this is Liz Davidson from Beyond Solitaire, and I'm here with another Gearloc guide in partnership with Chip Theory Games. As you can see, the Gearloc that I'm covering today is Stanza, and she's a bit of a doozy, so I'm both excited and a little nervous about this one, but I think I'm ready to make playing Stanza doable for you. So all Gearlocs march to the beat of their own drummer, but Stanza is in sync with her Luitar. She's got a cool instrument. She works a bit differently than other Gearlocs, which can be challenging. So as you can see, Stanza's difficulty is very, very high. She's at a level 4 difficulty for co-op and a 3 for solo. But if you deploy her songs wisely, she is a rock star, both in terms of helping the party and in terms of doing massive damage to one or more enemies. So we've got all of Stanza's stuff out, and we're going to talk about how to play her. We've got her Gearloc mat, her dice, her reference sheet, and of course we have our battle mat out in case I need to show y'all an example with Stanza right here in a melee spot because she comes out in a melee position despite her low attack and defense, which we should probably talk about later. And I've also put out our standard careless troll who is indeed careless enough to have entered another one of these videos. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is Stanza's innate ability, which is called Songsmith. Basically what Songsmith means is that Stanza is going to begin with her Luitar die right here on her Gearloc mat. And the Luitar die is really the engine that drives almost all of Stanza's actions because most of her dice represent songs. And we're going to start this video with a tutorial of the basics of what that would mean before going on to what individual songs actually do, because this is probably the hardest part to understand about how Stanza is played. And then once you get it, everything else will fall into place. So like some other Gearlocs, such as for example Gasket, who has both Hydro and Dex to work with, Stanza is also a dual resource Gearloc. She uses Dex just like everybody, but she also needs focus in order to perform most of her skills. And her focus primarily comes off of her Luitar die. So her innate ability is Songsmith, and before every battle, she's going to roll this die and put it in her prep area. When you look at the sides of this die, what you're going to see is like a little backwards music note with a number next to it, and the number that you roll before battle starts is the amount of focus that Stanza has to work with for that battle. So she can be more or less focused, and you're definitely going to be hoping that it's more. Once you upgrade to her innate +1 Songweaver, then Stanza can increase her focus off of that die roll by 1 as long as the die is not maxed out, which is pretty great. So let's say it's the start of battle. We're going to roll this die. We have 3 focus, and we're going to put it right here in our prep area, and it's going to hang out there for the duration of battle. The other thing that's interesting about this is that because Stanza's skills are not just normal skills, they are songs, they work differently from most skills in this game. In a lot of ways, they work the same way. You still need Dex to start or advance a song, as well as Stanza's focus. And you also deal with your songs at the start of the turn, just like when you select and roll dice. That's also the time for Stanza to decide what song she wants to start, advance, exhaust, or whatever she's going to do with them. So let's take an example song. This is the first one we're going to talk about when we get to the details. This is Rhythm in Motion. So if I've trained for this song and it's on my Gearloc mat, then what I'm going to do is, let's say that I want to play it as the start of my turn. Instead of rolling this song like a normal die, what I'm going to do is I'm going to spend 1 Dex. I'm going to make sure I have enough focus to start the song. And I definitely will for this first song because the focus required to play a song is matched with the stage of the song that you're in. So if you look at this lovely song, in the bottom right corner, you have a 1. And that means that this is the very beginning of the song. Songs also, songs typically have an intro and some choruses and some different verses. And Stanza's song dice work the same way. So when you intro a song, you're going to have a 1 in the bottom right corner, which means that you need 1 total focus in order to have that song in play. If you advance it the next turn, you're going to go up to 2, then 3, then 4, 5, and then on the other side we have vamping, which we're going to talk about in just a moment. But let's say that we're just going to put it right here on the first part of the song. We decided to have a song intro. That it's going to cost me 1 Dex, and then I check to see if I have enough focus for the song. Focus is a resource that Stanza needs to play songs, but it doesn't deplete. It just limits what Stanza can do. It kind of represents the amount of attention she can give everything in a specific battle. So I can never have more than 3 focus going unless I find a way to augment that. There's some dice that'll help, which means that I could have 3 songs that are kind of in their intro level. I could have 1 song in stage 1 and 1 song in stage 2. But I'm going to have to think about that really carefully because the way that Stanza's song skills exhaust also has to do with whether she's able to sustain them in play during battle. By the way, all the stuff that I'm saying about songs is right here in the back of your Gearloc reference sheet, so if you want to check the text and read along with me, that would be awesome. A recap so far. Before battle, Stanza rolls her Luitar die, and then that is the focus that she has to use for the battle. In order to start a song, you need to pay a dex and make sure that you have enough focus on your Luitar to sustain that song. And then from that point on, at the start of every turn, Stanza needs to decide which song she wants to play. And that means that if she's already got a song in play, she's going to need to advance that song or potentially vamp it, which we'll talk about. If she wants to start a new song, the beginning of her turn is also the time to do that. So at the start of a turn, Stanza absolutely must intro, advance, vamp, or exhaust each song that she is playing. So what that means is that if Stanza does not have the focus to keep a song going, then that song is going to exhaust for the remainder of battle, and Stanza will be done with that song until everything resets for the next battle. So for every song, you've already kind of seen this. You can intro, which means that you start it at this 1. You can advance the song, so you go from 1 to 2. That means it's still going to cost 1 dex to advance the song, and then it'll take up 2 of your 3 allotted focus in your focus bank. And then on your next turn, if you wanted to advance the song, you would have to pay another dex to do so, and that would have to be the only thing taking up any of your focus because you max out at 3. At least for this particular example. So when you reach a point where you can no longer advance a song, you have to exhaust it, which means that you need to be careful about how much focus you have and how much stuff you're putting into play and what you're willing to exhaust when you're playing Stanza. You do have one other option if there's something that you don't want to exhaust. So if there's a song that you don't want to exhaust and you just can't keep it going, but you want to kind of stall for a little bit, or if you have played through all parts of a song and you can't advance anymore, but maybe you also don't want to exhaust the song, you want to start it again, you can do something called vamp. So when you're vamping a song, then you can set it to the vamp side, which looks like this. And essentially it gives you a little bit of a break. So you still need that focus requirement of 1. It still costs you 1 focus, but like maybe you have 1 focus and you just want to kind of keep it in play for a little bit. It does not cost you any dex to have a song in vamp. So this also saves you dex for a turn when maybe you want to use other songs and you don't want to spend that dex, but you also don't want to exhaust the song. The thing about vamping though is that you can't vamp twice in a row. So if you have vamped a song on 1 turn, you're going to have to either start it over at the beginning on the next turn. You don't get to just pick up where you left off, or exhaust the die. So you don't want to vamp and then exhaust because you've kind of been wasting your time. Although that does happen. Hopefully when you vamp, you're going to be able to start the song again, because that's kind of the idea, is to keep it in play, suspended for a little bit, so you can regroup. And then, of course, Stanza at any time has the option to exhaust a song. And she may, in fact, need to do that if she is kind of overloaded in terms of her focus and needs to kind of lower the heat on that and meet her focus limits. The other thing that's really interesting about these songs, though, is you can do a little bit more with them than just play them. So rather than play a song, Stanza also has the option to roll it during her select and roll phase. And so at the beginning of a turn, you might decide that you're going to play a song, or you might decide that you're going to roll it for focus. That will cost you 1 of your precious dex, but it also can increase the focus that you have. So let's say that this is there were a bunch of other songs in play and I wanted to roll this one for focus. I could roll it. Let's say this is the side that I got. And see this backward music note on this corner that has a 2 on it? I could put that in my prep area, and now I have 5 focus to work with instead of 3. The other thing that's kind of interesting is that this sits here and augments my overall focus, but if I want to, and this will affect my focus totals, it'll take this 2 away, I could choose to start playing this song from my prep area, so it's not trapped as focus for the whole game. You can use something as focus for a little bit, and then as other dice exhaust, you can choose to play it. So you can start a song from your prep area that you were using as focus, it just brings your focus total back down. However, you cannot take something that's in an active slot and then roll it for focus later. Once it's active, you can either advance it, vamp it, or exhaust it, and those are the only options that you have. So just one more recap on the songs, because that's probably the hardest thing about Stanza. Songs do not work like normal skills. They cost dex to start, and they cost dex to advance, and you work with them at the same time as your rolled dice. But they also have a focus requirement, and you don't roll them like normal. Instead, you start them at the beginning of a song in your active slot. And then you have to either keep advancing through the song, realize that you're no longer focused enough to play it and exhaust it, or try to buy yourself a little bit of additional time through vamping. Songs can also be rolled from this part of your Gearloc mat for focus. It does cost a dex to roll them that way. And then later you can choose to get rid of that extra focus and play the song. But again, once it's up here, you can either advance it, vamp it, or exhaust it. All right, so now that we've discussed the basics of songcraft, let's talk about Stanza's first profession, which is folk singer. And folk singer songs are these red ones that kind of pass through the Luitar. So you can kind of think of it as the Luitar die is the heart of all of Stanza's song abilities. So that's why all the song trees kind of pass through that main die. So there are 3 songs in the folk singer profession. We have Rhythm and Motion, Siege of Caron, and Only Time Will Tell. And as we go through them, we're going to have to talk through a few more crucial elements of Stanza's song playing that are really going to impact the way that she plays and the way that you choose to strategically deploy her song skills. So before we talk about the specifics of what each of these sides means, let's have one more little tour through the anatomy of one of these lovely dice. So every song die face is going to tell you something important about the song. Here we have the stage of the song that we're in, and therefore the amount of focus that song is going to cost us on a specific turn. We have the amount of focus that this side would represent if you rolled it for focus, which we talked about before. And then this symbol right up here in the top right is also telling you something very crucial because it tells you who on the battle mat this verse of the song is going to impact. And that actually changes based on how advanced into the song you are. So every verse in one of Stanza's songs can have a different effect, which is in that main die face, and it can impact a different subset of people, both your allies and the baddies on the battle mat. So in this case, the S on Stanza's die stands for self, but this P here stands for party. And then on other dice, you're going to see some other symbols. So other possibilities include T, target, so you apply to Stanza's target. B, opposing units apply to all baddies on the battle mat. And A, all apply to every unit on the battle mat. So you can essentially impact yourself, your party, your target, all the baddies, or everyone. And this can happen with die effects that are both good and bad. So what that means is that there are going to be times when you have to decide whether the help that you're giving your party is worth the help that you're also giving baddies. There are also die faces where Stanza helps the baddies for one turn and then gets a really, really powerful and helpful effect on the next verse of her song. So you have to get through a bad turn and then advance the die to do something really powerful. And you're going to have to decide whether that's worth it to you every single time. And don't forget, in order to keep Stanza's die in play, once you've introduced the song, you can't just sit there in the same verse forever. You got to either advance or vamp and start the song again. So you're going to have to make some really crucial choices that have real consequences for you and your allies and your enemies. But we're starting really simple for now. Right here on Rhythm and Motion, the intro phase of the song boosts Stanza's movement by 2. So you've got a 2 over the feet and then S for self in the corner. So Stanza's movement gets a boost. It's also free movement that doesn't cost any dex, which is awesome. Here on side 2, it's the same thing, except that it's not just for Stanza, it's for the entire party. So the entire party gets 2 extra movement that doesn't cost any dex. Sounds pretty awesome to me. Here on the 3, Stanza herself gets 1 extra dex for that particular turn. So she's basically boosted the number of things she can do on her turn. And then in verse 4 of the song, that 1 extra dex applies to the entire party on their turns. Then when you max out at verse 5, if you make it that far, then the entire party gets 2 free dex on their turn, but that's the end of the song. So if you want to keep this bonus going, you're going to have to vamp, and if you can't afford that, then you'll need to exhaust the die. Because of course, there's a vamp side that you can use to buy a little time, or restart a song that you finished and wanted to play again. So that is Rhythm and Motion. Now let's look at the next song in this profession, Siege of Caron. I kind of like the idea of sieging a bunch of Carons, so I guess we'll just go with that. And this is die number 11. Let's have a closer look at it. So in its intro verse, this die has a very lovely effect, which is Cleanse, and it does this for the entire party, as you can see by the P in the top right. Cleansing means that all negative effect dice are removed and they cannot be added to these characters for the duration of this die's active status. So basically for one entire round, all of the Gearlocs will have their negative dice removed, and then nobody can add any more until Stanza reaches the start of her next turn and has to decide what to do about this die. One thing that's kind of cool about this one, and there have been some rules disputes about it online, but I'll just clarify here, according to the official chip theory interpretation, because Stanza adjusts her songs at the start of turn, that means that she could start this song and use Cleanse before something like, say, a poison effect impacted her on her turn, because that's also a start of turn effect, and you get to choose what order those go in. So having Cleanse is really nice because you can bail yourself out and you can bail the whole party out of some negative die effects. Then once you go into the second verse, you get an extra defense for yourself. So this is just for Stanza. And I do want to specify that when you get an extra defense, that means that you add an extra defense die to your active slots. In verse 3, Stanza once again can cleanse everyone. So this is a great die to have if you've got enemies that do a lot of poisoning or other nasty status effects, bleed, any of that kind of stuff. Then once again, Stanza gets an extra defense for herself from this die. And then in verse 5, we get this sweet guitar symbol, and what that means is encore. So Stanza will play this verse, complete her turn, and then immediately play another turn, which I think is pretty awesome, especially if you've got a whole lot to do. Then of course you've got some vamp because they've all got it. And that is our lovely Siege of Caron. So now we're going to go to Only Time Will Tell, and that is the third and final die in the folk singer profession. So let's have a look at it. It is die number 8. It's this last red one right here. So on the very first verse of this song, Stanza does something wonderful. She causes her entire party to heal 1 HP, which is really, really nice. If we make it to verse 2, then Stanza is going to be able to revive any KO'd Gearlocs in her entire party and bring them back with 1 HP because that's the number that is printed on the die. So when someone is KO'd, another Gearloc is able to revive them with a revivability. So Patches, for example, also has one within his dice pool. This die face in the third verse of the song allows all members of the party to heal HP by 2. And then here we have everybody reviving with 2 HP. So if you're in the middle of a really tough battle, I can see it. This being really nice because you could just keep reviving people who have been knocked out of the game. And then if you want to play the 5th verse, it's going to be risky because you see that A in the top corner. That means all. If Stanza chooses to continue to this finale of her song, everyone on the battle mat heals for 3 HP. That includes Gearlocs and baddies, so watch out. This is one of those kind of interesting risk-reward calculations where you have to decide what you're up for and what you're willing to give to the bad guys. And that is Only Time Will Tell, the third and final song in Stanza's folk singer profession. All right, so now I'm talking about music therapist profession. I'm talking about it next because it's the next one down on Stanza's reference sheet, although it's third down on her Gearloc mat. So the music therapist dice are the ones that are kind of in a cross around the Luitar, which is actually also the same color as the music therapist profession dice. I guess it stands as form of therapy. So let's talk through these dice and see what their impact would be. The first die in the music therapist profession is Second Chances. And basically what it does is it grants extra bones. In the first verse, it grants a bone to just Stanza because it has a self marker in the top right. In the second verse, it actually gives everyone a bone because of the A in the top right corner. So all units on the battle mat are going to get this effect. And in the case of baddies, what this would do is it triggers their bones triggered skills if they have them. So our Troll Youngin has a bone effect that is called Careless, and this would trigger on this verse of the song because it triggers for all Gearlocs in your party and baddies who are fighting you. In verse 3, you get another bone for yourself. In verse 4, everybody in the party gains a bone. And then there actually is no verse 5. This is just a nice face if you roll for focus and happen to get it. And then, of course, there's a vamp on the other side. So that is what happens when you play the lovely melody of Second Chances. Another option that we have in this profession is Stunning Beauty, which is die number 5. Let's have a look. So the first verse of Stunning Beauty actually impacts the baddie Q. And this particular symbol stands for BQ Flush. So when you start the song, what's going to happen is the lowest point baddie on the battle mat is going to be removed and placed on top of the baddie BQ stack. So it can kind of temporarily clear things up for you a little bit. When you go into verse 2, this is BQ Hold, and no baddies may enter the battle mat while this section is active. I particularly like this section because I like kind of holding off the bad guys while I can do a little bit of damage to their friends. Verse 3 is a stun, and so this is actually the first die that we've seen that affects the target specifically with its skill, if you see that T in the top right corner. And that means that Stanza needs to actually select a target for this verse of the song right then at the start of her turn. This also means that because Stanza is a melee fighter, she essentially needs to already be next to the baddie that she might want to stun in order for this to take effect. So you're going to have to think carefully about how to use Stanza's movement and dice that let her move a little extra, all that kind of stuff, to give her the opportunity to use these skills to their maximum effect. But this die face will let Stanza stun a target who is worth 1 baddie point or less. And then if we go on to verse 4, then Stanza gains the ability to stun a baddie with 5 baddie points or less. And again, a stun essentially causes that baddie to lose their next turn. It just temporarily freezes them for that turn while this is active. And again, this is actually only a 4-verse song. That 5th face is another special focus face that you would like to roll if you're trying to use this die for focus. And the other side is a vamp. So that is Stunning Beauty from the Music Therapist skill tree. Next, let's have a look at Forever Mine, a song with a kind of creepy title that has awesome effects. So the very first verse of Forever Mine has what is called a trance effect. And this essentially allows Stanza to choose a 1-point baddie on the battle mat, as evidenced by the 1 that's on top of that trance symbol. And she gets to take an extra turn for that baddie. This is so cool, actually. So this doesn't actually take the place of the baddie's turn. It still gets its own turn, but you also get to take an extra turn with it and do whatever you want. So basically what that means is that you can take an initial turn immediately using that 1-point baddie, and you can treat it as an ally. So you can move that baddie. You can choose a target for them. So obviously you choose another baddie instead of one of the Gearlocs. You can use that baddie's skills, and you can choose which of that baddie's dice to roll. So you basically just get to take over for a round, and it's super fun. In verse 2, you have that same ability, but you can do it to a 3-point baddie. And then in verse 3, again, you can put a baddie in a trance, but they can have up to 5 baddie points. Oh yeah. It doesn't actually go any higher than that. The 4th face is a focus face, just for extra focus. So is the 5th one. So there's just extra focus faces on here if you're using the die for that purpose. And then the other side, we got a vamp. So that's how you use Forever Mine. And then our last die in this profession is called Under the Old Zelfey. Do you take a selfie at the Zelfey? I don't know. That was stupid, but I'm leaving it in. So Under the Old Zelfey essentially provides different kinds of HP, buffs, or recovery. So in this case, Stanza herself will get a buff HP. On this face, everybody gets to heal 1 HP. So that's an all in that top right corner, so be careful. You might want to only use this if you're planning to go up higher and make up for that. So then once you get to verse 3, the die allows you to give 1 buff HP to everybody in your party. In verse 4, Stanza herself will get 2 buff HP. In verse 5, the entire party will get 2 buff HP. And then the other side is a vamp. So that's Under the Old Zelfey. You should use that one when you're willing to benefit baddies just a little bit in order to try to benefit yourself a lot. And that is Stanza's music therapist profession. All right, so now let's talk about Stanza's last song profession, which is the lovely emo screamer. So you can channel your feelings into songs that affect the baddies. So the very first song that we're going to talk about is called The River Deep. Oh, deep like my feelings. And that is die number 3. Let's have a look. So what the intro is going to do is it's going to cause all, so that means that both the Gearlocs and the baddies will be affected by this, to have a movement reduction of 1 for the duration of this verse. So it just makes you all sad, and then you slow down and kind of like mope a little bit around the battle mat. Then in verse 2, you need a target for this, but it allows you to disable a 1-point baddie. And what disable does is it stops an enemy from using its skills for the duration of the entire battle. So it can still move and it can still attack, but its skills are disabled. So if you would like to get rid of a really annoying enemy skill, this is fantastic. In verse 3, only the baddies have their movement reduced. Everyone else cheers up a little bit and like just kind of gets into the emo mood while the baddies remain depressed and move a little bit less. In verse 4, you're able to choose a 5-point baddie as your target and disable their skills for the duration of the battle. And then if you get to the 5th verse, then all of the baddies have their movement reduced by 2. So they become extra super depressed and just don't move around as much, which is pretty delightful actually. And then of course you have a vamp side. So that is the River Deep. We're just going to wade through it, everyone. Then we have the Breaking of Daelore. Just, you know, your heart breaks while you hear about the Breaking of Daelore. So let's see what that does to everyone. So this is actually a pretty sweet die because it does true damage, but you got to be careful who you're damaging. So in the first verse of Breaking of Daelore, you damage your target. They receive 1 HP worth of true damage, which is fantastic. It just speaks to the true nature of the heartbreak of your song. Then in verse 2, however, everyone is impacted by your emo mood, and all, including the Gearlocs and the baddies, take 1 true damage when they hear this powerful verse. Then once you get into verse 3, you're back to pummeling your target, the true target of your rage, and they lose 2 HP of true damage. In verse 4, all baddies take 1 HP worth of true damage because they've heard your song and they feel shame and sadness. Then in verse 5, you can do 4 true damage to your target. So you've effectively killed them softly with your song. And then on the other side, of course, there's a vamp. So that is The Breaking of Daelore, truly the song that all of the Gearlocs sing in high school, and Stanza is just the best at it. And then we've got Dissonant Dissidence. Say that 10 times fast. But this one will also have some interesting effects. Let's check them out. So the very first verse of this song is going to cause all baddies to gain the Careless effect. And basically what that means is that when they roll a bone, they also do a damage to themselves. Oops. And I do want to clarify, by the way, for the remainder of this die, that whenever you activate Careless, you only take the damage one time, no matter how many bones you rolled. And that's true for baddies and for Gearlocs. Verse 2, however, causes everybody to be careless. And so when you roll a bone, you hurt yourself for 1. And that's true for Gearlocs and baddies. Uh-oh. Verse 3, similarly, has everybody stubbing their toes all over the battlefield every time they roll a bone. Verse 4 causes all baddies to do 2 damage to themselves when they roll bones, which is awesome. The 5th phase is actually not a new verse, is instead an indication that you can roll the loot die. So if you are rolling for focus and this is the side that you roll, it's not actually a verse of the song, but it just gives you a chance to roll the loot die and get some extra sweet, sweet loot. And on the other side, we've got a vamp. So just so you can see it, here's that loot die. It's got a couple of really nice faces on it that let you do things like this is draw 2 loot. This one lets you add a special encounter to the encounter deck. This one lets you have a trove loot. And then there are options that let you heal yourself and also draw a loot card. So the loot die is pretty fun. You're always going to get something cool out of it. And so when you get that result on Stanza's dice, it's pretty enjoyable. And that is the sultry tone of Dissonant Dissidence. And then Stanza's final profession is Metalhead. And despite the name of the profession, it actually doesn't involve Stanza's Luitar or her songs at all. Instead, she also has an axe that she uses to hit people, and sometimes it's awesome. So here we have her axe blade, and basically what happens is the axe blade will do 1 damage, and basically the way it works is that the axe will do the damage on the left right away, and then that green value on the right is a poison effect die that gets added to the baddie that was targeted for that number. So you can do 1-1, 1-1, there's some bones on there, of course, some more bones, or perhaps if you're lucky, a 1-2, but no higher than that. But it gives you a good chance to give somebody some poison, which is always convenient. So that's Axe Blade. The next one's called Charged Swing, which is really, really interesting because it also does dual damage, where the number on the left is just normal damage that's done to the baddie that you targeted, and the blue number on the right does damage to someone adjacent to that baddie. So what's interesting is you get to choose the adjacent being that gets shocked. So if there's an adjacent baddie, you're going to want to go for that. But if it's a Gearloc, then somebody still has to get shocked. So you might end up accidentally shocking a Gearloc, or even Stanza herself if she's the only one who's adjacent to that baddie. So be a little careful with this one because that shock damage does carry through even if you don't want it to. But this one carries values of 1-1, 1-2, and even 1-3. And it's also got a couple of double bones faces just like the other one. So that is Charged Swing. And then you've also got Fury Cleave. And Fury Cleave is great because that yellow outline indicates the damage done is true damage. So yeah, you can get bones, but you can also do a bit of true damage to a baddie, up to 2, which is really nothing to complain about. 2 true damage is great. So that is Fury Cleave. This is perhaps also a good moment to just talk very quickly about Stanza's consumables. So she's got Luitar Strings and she's got Amplifier. So when you roll Luitar Strings, that's basically a die with a bunch of multi-bones faces. So if you just want a bunch of bones, then Luitar Strings is the way to go. And then Amplifier is a consumable that you can roll to get additional focus. So if you just want to bump your focus, but you want to play all your songs, then Amplifier is the consumable for you. And it has focus values of 2 to 4. So those are all of Stanza's dice. Now it is time to talk through her backup plan and then through her starting build stats. All right, so let's talk about Stanza's backup plan. All right, so for 1 bone, you can do Tune-Up. That basically just lets you increase your Luitar or Amplifier die by 1, gives you a little extra focus. For 2 bones, there's nothing. For 3, you can add Distortion. This lets you intro, advance, or vamp a song that's already in an active slot. This does not cost you any dex, so it's like getting a free song out on that front, but you still have to meet your focus requirements, so you still need to have enough focus available to actually do this. But this part of the backup plan is interesting because this is basically how you can end up playing 2 sections of the same song in the same turn. And if you want to kind of skip through a section really fast, that's a good trick. And then again, for 4 bones, nothing. But for 5 bones, you do Luitar Smash. And this is like a huge kind of last-ditch thing, but it's also super powerful. Basically, Stanza destroys her Luitar, and that deals damage equal to half of the number of focus in the prep area rounded down to a target. It exhausts all the profession dice that she has from her prep, skills, and active slots. So you're basically sacrificing everything on this one giant hit. So what you would do is you'd build up a whole bunch of focus over here, enough where you'd know it was worth it, and then do a huge smash against someone right at the end. So this is good for getting rid of like the last standing huge nasty baddie or something like that. And then, of course, if you get 6 bones, then you upgrade Stanza to her innate +1, and that is Song Weaver. It lets her bump the focus on her Luitar up by 1 when you roll it before battle. So for a beginner build strat, the first thing that's recommended is getting some decks, because Stanza's songs use it, and then also she needs it to do everything else, so you want to make sure that you've got some decks going. You also need to pay attention to your attack, and then go back for more dex. What's interesting is that the advice here is you choose more HP or more defense depending on baddies that you're facing. But don't forget, Stanza's stats in both of these areas are low, so think really carefully about how you want to build that. As for skills, Forever Mine is considered a great early song, while Under the Old Zelfey can help if you're struggling to kind of stay alive, so if you need some more healing, that's the one. Consider going for Breaking of Daelore if you want to do some more damage. So that is an overview of Stanza. As you can see, she is pretty great, and once you get used to her songs, she's not bad to play at all. There are more things to track with Stanza, such as what verse you're on, like what does that verse do, how much focus do I have to work with, but then once you have a handle on her, she can do a whole lot, so I highly recommend that you give her a try. Thank you so much for watching. I'll be back soon with another Gearloc guide, and happy gaming, everyone.